It's a new day, Africa and the world. Thank you for trusting For You Media Africa. We debut today's edition of Talking Point, where we focus on West Africa, specifically with the Alliance of Silent States, where recently these are three countries that formed the alliance, a regional bloc that was established last year, September, by the military leaders of Mali, Burkina Faso and Niger, announced on Sunday, September 15, 2024, that they would soon launch a common passport to enhance cooperation as well as security. The AES chair in Mali's transitional leader, Colonel Assimi Goïta, said in a TV address that the launch of a common biometric passport that will also facilitate the mobility of citizens across the three nations. He made the clearance statement to mark the one-year anniversary of the Alliance of Silent States, or better still, the signing of the Liptako Goma Charter since its creation on September 16, 2023. Burkina Faso, Mali and Niger formed the AES and announced the creation of a joint military force to counter spiraling security challenges posed in their countries by terrorist groups. It is worthy of note that these three West African nations withdrew from the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, which had threatened to intervene militarily in Niger following a coup that took place last year, precisely in July. The three countries, with a combined population of 72 million, though affected by instability caused by militant groups, are fast growing economically. Ladies and gentlemen, today we shall be analyzing these recent move or recent announcement to form or launch a common passport amongst the three countries that form the Alliance of Silent States. This is Talking Point. Stay with us. It's always with great joy that we come to you, ladies and gentlemen, on every edition of Talking Point. And of course, this day, like we mentioned in our preamble, we shall be focusing on these latest developments by yet the members of the Alliance of Silent States, where they've announced that soon enough they shall be launching a new or common passport. Of course, this comes shortly after they have overcome several or numerous sanctions placed on them by the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS. And of course, to unpack this topic of discussion this day, I'm being joined first of all the way from Nigeria by SHITTU, who is the digital news editor, who is joining us all the way from Lagos. Thank you immensely, sir, for taking our time to join us this day.
Thank you for having me.
And we are equally being joined all the way from the United States, Dr. STANLEY, FONGOD, an economist, the CEO of Trust and FinTech, and above all, he is a Pan-Africanist. Thank you immensely, sir, for taking our time to join us.
Thank you so much for having me, Sharon, and thank our viewers. And I hope today we will have a fruitful discussion as we look at the Sahel.
Absolutely, and it's worth noting that all these countries do revolve around the Saharan region. To debut with you all the way from Nigeria, Mr. SHITTU, you listened to the preamble in a bit to dive right deep into today's topic of discussion. First, how did you welcome this recent decision by the AES countries to announce the launch of a common passport very soon from now?
Basically, the move by Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger Republic is understandable. I think it's in furtherance of the alliance military cooperation that they've had. What we must understand is that these countries are deciding to forge ahead, to collaborate, to make for economic ease, ease of doing business between the three states. They want to make sure that there is ease of movement between citizens of this state. So it is understandable that on that basis, they are launching this passport. However, it has far-reaching implications. It has, dimensions, political dimensions, considering the fact that it will now begin to favor people from these states as against other West African states or even other parts of the continent. So let's hope that in spite of the intentions, it is intended to, achieve, let it not be a form of, a way to to segregate against other Africans who may want to pass through these countries of interest.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for setting the pace, Mr. FOWORA. Now, back to you, Dr. Stanley FONGOD. You listened to what your co-panelists had to say as far as that is concerned. In a bid not to make some sort of comparative analysis as far as the economic bloc, or better still, the whole African continent is concerned, how did you welcome this recent decision or recent move by these breakaway regions of ECOWAS wanting to create or launch their own passport?
I think it's time for us to literally begin to celebrate whatever is coming out of these three nations, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. And the reason for that is because if you look at what is happening in places like Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali, in relationship to the economic growth, for that matter, knowing mindfully where they were just, half a decade ago, we will be looking at a more positive outlook on the economic front. We will be looking at a more positive outlook on the security front, despite some of the few hiccups that is happening in the Sahel. But these are legitimate and welcome changes. So the creation of a new passport is not an issue at all. I think it is welcome news. It's music to my ears. Reasons being, this might just be the first step where we move towards having a broader continental-wide passport on the continent of Africa. Number one, we have to fully also embrace the fact that a biometric passport simply means they will be putting everybody else within these three states that is known for its great, intrusion of insurgency moving deep from the Sahara into the Sahel. And because of that, those three member states will be able to know who is roaming in their country and who is not part of that. So we can be able to put an end and, basically catch terrorists and terrorist groups before they inflict havoc on those in these member states. So it is welcome news. I think it is extremely exciting. It is a new day. This is probably what ECOWAS should be thanking God for. Unfortunately, we know how it goes. I know there will be pushbacks from ECOWAS, maybe sanctions, I don't know. But the reality is I celebrate whatever is happening within these three nations. They have proven their worth. And despite the fact that they are still rule, it's not yet a democracy. But at some particular point in time, we have to weigh one evil versus another evil and to figure out what is going to be the outcome, what will be the common good, for the people. So this is welcome news to me.
Absolutely, we look forward to seeing this innovation bringing about a positive change, not just within these member states, but equally not just the West African sub-region, but the entire continent as a whole. Now, to you, SHITTU, your co-panelist cited the aspiration of an African passport, and I would like to dive right down that lane. Well, we've seen Africa on a quest to having a single passport, which dates back to 2010 and even way before that. But when you look at the African continent as of now, with this clarion call by several pundits on the continent for Africa to actually get to a point where you can emerge with a single passport, as the belief is going to not just boost economic growth, it's not just going to boost development, but it's equally going to amplify integration within the continent. So do you believe that these announcements of the member states of the alliance of Sahel states to actually come up with a biometric passport is going to go a long way in lifting this Africa's quest for a single passport?
Africa is 54 in terms of number. Three countries aligning together to have a unified passport doesn't really push African unity much. If you consider, for example, the e-passport that we had, ECOWAS passport that we had, allowed us to travel across the entire West Africa. So having a passport that only offers you movement within three countries doesn't really, hit the argument. However, if there is going to be better collaboration between 2 or 3 African states, it is fine. Mind you, these 3 countries have a lot of commonalities. It's, you know, within the Sahel, they are all French-speaking countries, and then they are battling about the same kind of climate issues and security challenges. Therefore, if we say that this passport serves a purpose, yes, to forge ahead, to forge unity, you know, between these countries, that is understandable. But it may not, in the long run, be anything to boost, you know, unified Africa. Other African states can, you know, can borrow a leaf from it and can be inspired and say that, okay, if we have 3 countries doing this, or we have regional passports, you know, then we could do something for the entire continent. That is fine. But I don't see this as a major boost in that regard.
Okay, Mr. Shittu. Now, Dr. Fongod, do you share the same opinion as Shittu FOWORA?
I think in a broad perspective, yes. Obviously, you're looking at 3 states and you're asking yourself, you know, with 54, it would be extremely quite difficult to extrapolate, you know, any kind of real legitimate benefit so far as the rest of the continent is concerned. And I think that, you know, the only reason why this is worth celebrating, number one, is because once you have been taken away from ECOWAS, you have been taken away from, you know, you've basically been cut out of ECOWAS. The issues of, you know, travel, you know, within West Africa has been limited and stunted. The only thing to do is to unite and find ways in which you can be able to bring some kind of mobility, you know, within the states that be. I'm talking about the AES. And so if we are looking at that in that regard, then it is good. It is legitimate. I think it makes a lot of sense. You know, Mr. Shittu said something which has to do with the broader perspective of the Sahel. Number one, not just the fact that they are French speaking, they are dealing with intense, you know, geographical issues. We are talking about the Sahara moving deep into the Sahel. And as a result of that, we need to be able to have all kinds of real legitimate ideas, people who are doing something that is working in one part of that country, okay, to be able to spread that idea across. And I think that being able to allow for the movement of goods and services and people can be of great benefit, as those who are succeeding in Niger in fighting the Sahara can be able to move that technology, those ideas, into places like Mali, into places like Burkina Faso, because they are absolutely dealing with the same issues. And then secondly, on the issues of terrorism, I think that this is welcome news. It's not just that we are moving people across the you know, across the AES. It's about the fact that the people that are moving across these 3 nations, these 3 member states, we know exactly who they are, where they're coming from. And I think that traveling, having a single passport across international borders within those 3 member states will be good, so we can be able to stop any act of terrorism, stop people who are planning, stop people who are not supposed to be there. We can be able to identify people who are coming in and know exactly who they are, where they are, and we can be able, since there's a centralized system where everyone is registered in, it will be it will be easy for us to be able to track who is coming in, where they are, in which country they are, and to be able to find out exactly what they're up to and be able to stop any kind of an attack long before they happen. I think this is absolutely necessary. But in relationship to the broader perspective of the entire continent, well, not really. Maybe this, as Mr. Shittu stated, maybe this will be an inspiration to different smaller blocks across the continent, so that eventually we might have a continental bloc, which, you know, would be a free passport for all Africans.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fongod. Back to you, Shittu. Now, you listened, and earlier on you mentioned the aspect of security. Of course, we know that the 3 member states are cited by Colonel Assimi Goïta, the transitional leader of Mali. He mentioned during his televised address on Sunday that this biometric passport, it's in a bit not just to foster cooperation, but in a bit to sequel or bring about security within the 3 member states. Now, in that regard, which is in line with what you said in your previous contribution, how is this going to go a long way in ensuring that these countries are able to cope? Because recently in Mali, in Bamako to be precise, there were some military installations that were being attacked by terrorists. Now, just in that light, how would these passports go a long way in curbing those insurgent attacks which these three countries are dealing with?
Well, passports usually are expected to ease movement between countries. When you have visa reciprocity, where you have ease of movement, ease of doing business, and all that. Don't forget that some time ago, some Nigerians were arrested in Benin Republic because they were trying to move some items related to petroleum products. This is because of the strained relationship between the two countries. But you see, when you have formidable, an understanding, maybe a tripartite agreement between three countries, it means that these countries can relate a little more, in a more understanding manner without unnecessary economic or social political hiccups. In terms of security protection, if these countries if they do not have visa restriction, it means that the pace at which you can quickly deploy forces, the pace at which you can send intelligence forces and diplomatic missions, across these regions is hastened up.
Shittu, are you with us?
Again, you could also look at Russian angle to it, because could be, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Please proceed.
Yes. Yeah, so there could also be some Russian angle to this whole thing, because there is a shift from, the alliances that Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger has had over the years, shifting towards Russia. So some of these policies could align them more to Russia, and also ensure some level of educational exchange between, the three countries. If there is free movement, it could help people who decide they would rather study, maybe Nigerians who would rather study in Burkina Faso, or Malians who would rather study in Niger, for example. It will ease, all of that. So we're talking about trade, we're talking about movement, we're talking about educational exchange, we're talking about military intervention and military assistance, and a whole lot of others. So there's a chance that, this arrangement would boost all of that, both security and all of these issues that we have highlighted.
Absolutely, and of course that is just in line with what is expected of these countries as far as their efforts in tackling these security challenges is concerned. And now I would like to stay with you, Shittu. We've seen tensions, especially when these countries were undergoing sanctions from the economic bloc, that is ECOWAS. But then these countries over time have shown to be thriving at the level of economics, and of course, just recently we saw highlights that Burkina Faso was intended to come about with a currency, but it's not yet clarified. With all these measures that these countries are taking, do you believe that it's going to go a long way in fostering that so much unity that Africa is in need of?
Well, it's one step at a time. It's taking the step to do the needful. When you form alliances, you have to make some allowances for, member states, so that people would say that since they joined this group, this arrangement, the alliance, they've been able to tick the following boxes. They made progress, they made, because these countries already are under sanctions. So if they align themselves in order to work and integrate together, it is about strengthening, mutual interest and ensuring that they're able to benefit better, from what they are shared values. So it is not a problem. We are hoping that it will help these countries to progress, to be a lot better than they are at the moment. And hopefully it may even be a reason for ECOWAS to consider softening the measures and strictures that are the needs. Just recently, the Nobel laureates called for the release of, ousted President Bazoum of Niger. Even if these countries are forging alliances. The West African region and the entire world, indeed, is still looking to see, will they do good by the international standard? You know, will they do the needful? Because it's still questionable that you are holding onto the ousted president for reasons that are not known to most of us. So that's my take on that.
Thank you so much, SHITTU. Now, to you, Dr. FONGOD. Recently, precisely on September 16th, we saw the Director General of National Security in Cameroon that officiated the free movement of persons within the NYEMECK sub-region. That might be an aside, but I'll be syncing that with today's topic of discussion. And today, we're discussing this recent decision, which was seen recently equally by members of the Alliance of Sahel States in a bid to foster integration amongst themselves. Now, in that regard, Africa's always been on a quest for single passports, for a single currency, for it to be able to bring Africans together, despite or in spite of the numerous regions in which they find themselves, be from the north, from the south, from the east, or from the west. Now, how would you go, or do you believe that this recent move is going to go a long way in the bid, because you're an economist, it's going to go a long way in boosting this free movement of people, not just within the continent, but within this bloc, which is something you cited earlier on in your previous contribution, in a bid to boost economic growth? Because you notice that these countries, since the merger over a year now, they have actually, their gross domestic product has actually skyrocketed as compared to what it was in the past. So how is this going to go a long way, not just boosting the free movement of people in this dream or quest for free or borderless Africa, but it's going to go a long way in boosting the economic growth of the continent?
I think the first thing we need to understand is that we've had an increase in mobility of trade, you know, across these three member states as a result of the fact that they were yanked out of the ECOWAS market, all right? They exited the ECOWAS market, and obviously they were left to themselves. We are talking a market that is as large as 400 million people. And as a result of that, you know, a huge portion of their market share for small to medium-sized enterprises within these three member state countries literally lost a significant, you know, market share. And obviously, they are now placed in a situation where they have to look within themselves and among themselves, you know, to be able to maintain their production levels, to do whatever it is that they were doing post when they got kicked out of the ECOWAS. That being said, I think that this, whatever is happening within these three member states, is extremely very important for now. There are goods and services that is being produced within these three member states that the rest of the continent do need. I am not a big proponent of the fact that we need to be able to segregate people, you know, especially for political reasons, you know, quarantine them and basically say, stay there, do your own thing, and, you know, and whatever. But there is now this whole entire notion of necessity, because they have been pushed so much and they are now quarantined wherever they are in the Sahel. They are doing the best that they can. And if you look at the GDP, if you look at their economic outlook on all the economic indexes that has come out, it projects places like Niger, you know, to become the fastest growing, you know, power on the African continent, the 7th largest, you know, growing economy in the world. That literally means that whatever it is that they're doing, it's kind of working. And if that was going to hold sway, we should now be able to start asking ourselves, how do we use that as a point of reference on the continent of Africa, you know, for the rest of us? There are certain economic principles that is taking place in places like Niger. We have to be able to harness those ideas and then try to implement them, you know, across the continent. Obviously, the economic landscape in places like Niger, you cannot mirror image that across the continent. It is different. They are primarily, you know, getting a whole lot of money coming out of things like uranium. We understand that that is different across the continent, but we also have places like Nigeria, good with lithium, places like Cameroon with gold and iron ore. But the question, and places like the DRC with everything else you can think about, the question becomes, how are we going to be able to harness that without having the kind of mindset and the will and the fortitude that those guys in places like Niger do have? So while we are talking about this on an economic front, I think that the economic principles in place and the will to be able to do certain things that is absolutely important, without which, if we are not doing it, then we might be sitting down on all the mineral resources, natural resources that we have, as we have always done on the continent of Africa, and there will be no significant economic growth across the board. I think that the Alliance of the Saharan States are doing exactly what they're supposed to do, and they're doing it well based on the circumstances that they have been forced into. And in the end, all we hope for is that whatever becomes the positive outlook, whatever it is that emerges out of these three member states, we should be able to somewhat harness that and push that across, the rest of the continent. If you're going to ask me about, places like the CEMAC zone, the notion is we're still dealing with one key component, which is basically the single currency we have that is being manipulated and controlled in terms of its inflation, in terms of value. All of that is being controlled outside of those economists or people who basically are controlling the BANEH Bank. So all of that is supposed to be done within the continent of Africa. We are supposed to be the ones who sit and say, this is exactly how we're going to manipulate this particular currency. This is what we need to do, not somebody from the outside, so that whatever be the fallout will be us. I think that the idea that Mali is thinking about introducing a new currency makes tremendous sense, because we need to basically exit from, from the CFA and be able to have a currency and hopefully allow that currency to be backed by some natural resource, to be backed by some commodity. Either that commodity will be something like lithium, but to my best, assessment, the best commodity that you should be able to use at any point in time to back up any currency should be gold, because gold has this intrinsic value, and gold, the quality of gold in the world is pretty much known at this particular time. Mineable gold is pretty much known at this particular time. That gold, that quantity will never increase. There's no alchemy. You cannot create, excuse me, yes, you cannot create gold in the lab. You can do so with diamonds, but you cannot do so with gold. You can create fake diamonds in the laboratory, but you cannot do so with gold. So there's no alchemy for gold, which means whatever quantity of gold we have now, that's the quantity of gold that existed since the days of people like Napoleon, Mansa Musa. That's the same gold we're having today. And no gold has literally left the planet Earth, which means we are talking about a commodity that is well tested, whose intrinsic value is good, and which quantity, all right, is limited. This quantity will never increase. So if you know anything about, supply and demand, or money for that matter, the moment you begin to increase the quantity of money in circulation, so we start talking about inflation, because you have a large portion of money pursuing very limited commodity. And that's how the inflation comes about. We just print paper that is backed by nothing. But I think that if places like Mali decides to be able to come up with the currency, let that currency be backed by a tangible commodity. That will be absolutely beautiful, because what that will mean is, for the first time on the continent, we'll be having a currency whose value is absolutely known at all times. We know it is trusted. It will be a commodity. It will be a currency whose value will not rise. It will not fall, all right, based upon just different economic and market conditions. That particular currency will stand its ground. And that is the best currency for anyone who is interested in trade, because if you're selling something and that's how much money you're selling for, that that's what you're going to be getting. And obviously, that currency will become the de facto currency on the continent of Africa, because everyone, in my opinion, will begin to dump the CFA, and of course, the Naira is nothing to write home about, all right? And so that will become the currency that everybody looks up to.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. FONGOD. Please kindly check your device to make sure the noise is not coming from your end. Okay. Thank you so much. Now back to you, Mr. Shittu. You listened to your co-panelists who had a lot to say as far as that is concerned. And now, when you look at the African continent and you look at the, like Dr. Fongod was saying, these three countries have grown over time exponentially in terms of their gross domestic product. But away from that, when you look at Africa, what do you believe, or how imperative is it for African nations to be united, sampling what's happening, or in a bit to do some kind of a snowball analysis? When you look at those three countries and how they have grown so far, how imperative would it be for Africa to be united as far as achieving its goals is concerned, and of course dealing with some of the crises that are plaguing the Sahel?
Africa's future is tied to its unity. You know, Africa has everything. What we are lacking in is, you know, the political wherewithal, you know, the collective bargaining, you know, decision to say, this is what we need to do, this is how we need to progress. And so the moment we're able to come together as a people with a unified understanding that our future relies on how much we put our strengths together, and we begin to see some progress. Mind you, it is sad that Africa does a lot of trade with foreign countries as against itself. You know, so you have countries, say Ghana, doing, you know, business with Australia more than it is doing with Nigeria, when there are lots of areas of collaboration and cooperation that, you know, these two countries can, you know, align, you know, with. So we can explore a lot. And one of the areas that I see that Africa needs to do a lot in is IT, you know, and education. You know, you see a lot of Africans, a brain drain on the continent, seeing a lot of Africans, you know, leaving the continent and heading, you know, to Europe, the United States, and, you know, the UK. It's impacting on, you know, the health, you know, and the life of people on ground. You cannot have the best brains and the best minds leaving the continent, impacting other parts of the world, while we are here on the continent, unable to break, you know, from the barriers and, you know, the stranglehold that, you know, the economic crisis, social, political crisis have put the masses in.
Thank you, Shittu, for that brilliant contribution. And now back to you, Dr. Fongod. I would like to stay in line with your previous response. We look at Niger. Niger is a great producer of uranium, which is something you have always highlighted in the course of our numerous programs. When you look at Burkina Faso, it's rich in cotton. But when you look at a country like Mali, which is rich in gold, and of course, when you see the three countries, it's true, the African continent is known as a mineral-rich continent. But when you look at these three countries, in the span of 1 year, they have been able to grow their GDP from something it was not, or from something it wasn't under the, or since they were tied to their former colonial master. Now, what do you think these countries are doing right that is helping them grow at such steadfast, say, economic-wise, that other countries on the African continent that may be facing some economic impasse or economic challenges should learn from, so they can be able to thrive in that light?
Fair trade. Fair trade comes as a result of genuine leadership. So when you have people who are willing to be able to trade and sell everything that the country has for their own personal gain because they are in political leadership, that becomes a problem to the masses. But if you look at these countries, those mostly the mining that is taking place on the continent of Africa is artisan mining. So if you look at the artisan mining that is taking place in places like Mali, all right, and also if you look at what is happening in places like Niger, the reality is that as of now, what used to be a free-for-all, so far as the Europeans are concerned, is no longer the status quo. So people are now buying whatever commodity is coming out of these countries at fair value. And that is what Africa needs. We don't need foreign aid. We don't need people to dump, you know, cheese and milk and bread, you know, on the African. We don't want to be considered, you know, a place where the goodwill of the West, you know, it's literally espouse. We are not beggars on the continent, but we have been made to feel that way. We have been indoctrinated to feel that way, and that is why if you look across the continent, the most rising economic, the sector that is rising the most on economic terms is actually the non-profit sector. Look at countries like Cameroon, look at countries like Nigeria. Every, Tom and Harry, has an NGO. For what? We need to get into the profit-making enterprises. We need to get into a place where we are producing, money. We are making profits, not a place where we are sitting writing, letters, to foreign corporations daily so that they can be able to send money and we can spend on behalf of the people. We are sitting on tremendous resources on the continent of Africa, and we must make good use of it. A place like Mali is not just home to gold. A place like Mali is home to something so significant that the whole entire world's scholarship, wishes that they should be able to just be in the place like Timbuktu in Mali. A place of the ancient manuscript, a place of places like the Sankore University, a place that has history, rich in history, manuscripts as far back as the 7th century, all right, all the way to the 14th century, 16th century, are loaded in Timbuktu, manuscripts on everything you can think about. And unfortunately, with the incursion of terrorist organizations like the ISIS, you have jihadist groups left and right that are burning ancient manuscripts in places like the Sahel. We're losing a lot of that history. But that country is rich in terms of its historical past. Remember, that is home to men like Mansa Musa. So that's home to great scholarships, that has come out of that entire little tiny hard-to-reach place, the El Dorado in the Sahara, known as Timbuktu. All right. Well, the Niger, a place, Timbuktu. Well, the Niger basically, comes as it moves up north of Sierra Leone, moves into the desert. That's the place where it bends, moves down south to cut through the Nigeria as it exits into the Delta Niger River in Nigeria. That is the beauty of what we are having in the place like Mali. We have to be able to find ways in which it's not just that we are talking about, the commodities that we have, is that we have a rich history in these areas that is good, and it has always been great, for a tourist coming in to see exactly what is going on, to see all of these ancient buildings, and to look at the architecture that has lasted for hundreds of years. All right, we need to be able to sell that, but unfortunately, we are a little bit more focused on what we have as natural resources, which is good. I think that it is great for fair value. On your question, if the continent can be able to just copy what is going on with these three nations, that we will sell what we have at fair value, don't feel sorry for us. Don't have pity for us. No, we're not interested in that, because we have learned for so many years, for over a couple of decades now, that is your manipulation on coming to collect our diamonds and then give us a bag of rice. Don't bring no bag of rice. Bring us the money. We'll give you a kilo of gold at fair market value. That's how we grow an economy, and that's how we grow the region. That's how Africa emerges from the stalemate that she's in now.
Actually, just to reiterate to our audience that you are the CEO of Creston FinTech, I'll stay with you, Dr. FONGOD. Though this might not align with your co-panelist, SHITTU FOWORA, do you think that this depicts unity and solidarity as far as, which is in line with a prerequisite for Africa's advancement?
If unity is going to be a place where we try to be able to come together because we are trying to portray this utopia to the West that doesn't exist in reality, and then we keep suffering on the continent of Africa, then I would consider that to be quite demented. That's not unity. I think that unity for us will be for the interest of the African, with the African at the center of that interest, not any European. And so if we are talking about unity where the continent emerges fully on a collaboration, where each and every one of us become this beautiful mosaic, we become this beautiful painting, with our different cultures, values, values and customs, and where we bring our ideas onto the table and compete with ideas, you know, be it on economic front, be it, you know, in our craft, be it in our arts, be it in our cuisine, and the more dominant one begins to emerge. For example, personally, I think that the best food ever made is no longer coming out of Cameroon. The best food ever made is not coming out of Accra, Ghana. I think it's coming out of Nigeria. I think it's coming out of a place in Nigeria called Oyo, all right? It is called seafood okra. I'm a fan, all right, of seafood okra. But see, I will never be able to understand that without the competition of African cuisine. This is the beauty of the diversity we have on the African continent, that each and every one of us can bring what we have. For another person, it might be something coming out of the Ashanti land. For another person, it might be something coming out of the East African belt. But whatever it is, this is the beauty that we have as Africans, so that we can now be able to say to ourselves, this continent is ours, truly, and we can be able to find what works for us as Africans. To each and every one of us is given the mandate to elevate, inspire, and educate us as Africans with an Afrocentric mindset, not something that is European. I want to be able to look at my brother SHITTU in Nigeria and sit down with him on the same table and have a conversation that no European can be able to eavesdrop into that conversation. A conversation that inspire, motivate, and push each and every one of us to where we're supposed to be. That's who we are as Africans. I understand that there might be differences where we're trying to be able to create this entire outlook that says that we are good because the whole entire world is looking at us as state men and state women, and so we are within the greater, broader society of the world. I get that. But the reality is that hasn't worked for the last 6, 7, 8, 9 decades, right? It has not worked. Let's figure out what works. Let Africa stand up as African, and then the moment we have fully understood who we are as a people, then we can now be able to sell what we have to the rest of the world. We can no longer allow the West to dictate how we need to think. The worst thing that has happened to the African is that the Europeans and the Western world has taught the African how to think. That's wrong. You cannot teach us what to believe. Allow us the ability to believe what we want to believe based upon our customs, our values, and our traditions. That is who we are as Africans. And unfortunately, I hope that, unfortunately, a lot of people do not buy that, but I hope that I'm able to sell that well, that each and every one of us is unique in our own identity. So we are. Just embrace us as Africans. But I need to be able to embrace my brothers first, embrace my sisters first, long before I have a conversation with anyone in the West.
Indeed, this beauty and unity in diversity. Now to you, SHITTU, listen to your co-panelist, Dr. FONGOD, who had a lot to say as far as that is concerned. But when you look at the project of a single passport across Africa, why do you think this has delayed for so many years and is yet to materialize?
Well, thank you so much. Before I talk about that, I need to appreciate my brother. I'm glad that he has sampled cuisine from Oyo. You may not know, but I'm actually from Oyo State, a very proud son of Oyo State. So again, because I have a very broad culinary spectrum, I've also sampled the roux from Cameroon. I've tasted kung fu a few times, so I understand. So it's fascinating. Now back to your question. Integration across the continent. One of the reasons why we've not been able to have, one passport for all Africans, I would say, is because of poor communication. Sometimes the issues are clear, but everybody is holding ground to say, I am a sovereign state, and create unnecessary barriers to trade, to movement, to tourism, to collaborations. It's difficult. It's more difficult to travel within Africa than it is to travel between, say, to Asia or to Europe. That has to change. I do not know why, the political will to make this happen has slowed down over the years. Someone has to revive it, be it AU, be it ECOWAS, be it COMESA. We have to revive this conversation. I want to be able to up on a Monday and say, I'm heading to South Africa and not have unnecessary, hiccups because I want to travel. It should be with ease that a Namibian should say, okay, he's heading to Cameroon or, to visit all the, wonderful tourist sites. Also a Gambian to say he's going to Kenya. This way, we'll begin to wealth within the continent. We'll remain more on the continent, as against people who will think, well, since it is difficult to, travel within the continent, we'll probably head to Asia or head to Europe, to enjoy your vacation or staycation, as the case may be. So we must do whatever it takes to glean and fetch as much wealth as we can, share prosperity and share a common goal, a common ambition, such that Africa will remain great. One of the reasons why we've not been able to push forward is because of undue external influence. And in fact, some people think that the shift from the West towards Russia is still another form of influence, a form of neocolonialism that may impact us in the future. I will not begrudge any country that is moving away from the West and approaching the East. But what I want to say is that it should not be, a slave mindset where whatever comes from, be it East or the West, is taking hook, line, and sinker. Everything that comes must be domesticated. It must be understood as something that we can use, tool, value, and focus on the people more than to say that, okay, because this is not the West, then it has to be good. It doesn't have to translate like that. We must look out for what works for us, what works for our people, and what will impact our future. And that is why conversations, communication, and collaboration must continue among African states.
Yeah, to stay with you, Shittu, it's true that Africans need to identify what works best for them for their own good. But then, since we have highlighted that so far this project has actually been slowed down due to one or two reasons, what do you think Africa needs to take into consideration, or better still, the powers that be need to take into consideration to ensure that this gets into full force towards the Africa that we want?
Well, like I said, there is need for more communication. Let African states communicate with themselves more. These issues that we are talking about is causing a lot of loss. If you look at how much loss in terms of forex we experience, every country across 54 African countries experience on an annual basis, you realize that that money will have been conserved, within the continent. Egypt, particularly, Tunisia, and Algeria are doing brilliantly well in terms of tourism. I mean, before the Russian-Ukrainian war escalated, Egypt had about 37,000 Russians and about 20,000 Ukrainian on their soil. I think about almost 60,000 of them. These are two countries that were going to war, but the people from these countries were in Egypt, enjoying themselves and considering a better, future. So that is a lot of forex coming into the country. Now imagine if every African state creates an enabling environment to attract this number of people on an annual basis. Create an enabling environment for people to be able to interact, even amongst themselves. So I want to be able to, go to Cameroon and spend my holiday, go to, Gabon or Algeria and spend my holiday, and I want them to do the same to Nigeria. That way, we are able to learn more, understand ourselves better, and the collaborations can take, a direction. So African states must communicate more and must consider information sharing. Because again, if we know that we are battling almost the same kind of crisis, climate change issues, security issues, food security issues, then we must communicate with ourselves. How are we solving these problems at a regional level? How are we solving these issues, at a state level, such that others can imitate what we are doing or what we can take from what they are doing? Knowledge is power, and therefore, when one experiment has succeeded in a part of Africa, the best thing to do is to replicate that, experiment. So if we have a farming solution that has helped to boost the quality of grains or the quality or yield of agricultural produce, say, in Kenya, it should be replicated in Uganda. Similar region, you can domesticate every idea, from one region to the other. So these things are things that we should consider, as a country, whether into one.
Absolutely, SHITTU FOWORA was joining us all the way from Nigeria. Now, to proceed with you, Dr. FONGOD, I'll capitalize on your aspect of capacity as you as an economist. You listened to SHITTU while he spoke on how imperative or how Africa can go about the project of a single passport. Now, I would like to focus on the economic aspect of this. When you look at these three countries, but looking at it from a global or say general perspective, what do you think it would need for Africa to finally have a single currency, and how can the continent go about this project?
I think a single currency, I can't sing this enough, will only be meaningful if that currency is backed by a certain commodity. I think that's what we have on the African continent that is making tremendous sense for us. And there is a sense of urgency for us to be able to do that. If you look at Cameroon, for example, there is a river on the eastern part of Cameroon called the Bombay. That's in a place called Betua. That's the river that you need to cross in a place called Betty if you will be entering into Central African Republic. That river is dying. I had a WhatsApp video communication with a friend who is mining in that sector of the country, and he took me to the river, a river I have crossed many times, and I saw the river, and there is no river left. And the reason for that is because just upstream, there's a Chinese company that is aggressively mining, dumping all kinds of toxic waste into the river and destroying the entire ecosystem. Unfortunately, we're doing absolutely nothing about it in Cameroon. This is the story of places like in some parts of Nigeria. This is the story in some parts of Ghana, that we have all of this aggressive mining destroying the entire area. And long after the miner is gone, those who are indigenous to that particular area will have to live with the consequences thereof. What does that mean? You have children who are born with cleft palates. You have increase of certain types of cancers because of the mercury and all toxic hard minerals that are being poured into the water stream. So we have to be able to start talking about a single currency that is backed by a commodity, and I will suggest that that commodity should be gold. What that means is this: let us do a geological studies, all right, across all the areas on the continent of Africa. Instead of literally mining this particular area, we are able to quarantine certain portions that are beside rivers that will be able to contaminate the environment. We quarantine those areas and we put a ban, a moratorium, no mining in those areas, collect those certificates and use them for the cluster abundance of gold in those areas, and use them as financial instruments so that we can now use that to trade and do all of our financial transactions without touching the soil. It's happening in places like Canada. We can be able to do that in Cameroon. We can be able to do that in Nigeria and in places like Ghana. We don't have to mine our natural resources and then send them out to Europe, send them out to the West, send them out to the East, China, India, and Russia, and only to receive them back into the continent as very expensive jewelry. That makes absolutely no sense to me. Let us be able to do this. If we're able to have this currency that is backed by a commodity, not only that will it be able to protect the environment, but we will have a currency that is meaningful around the world. There is no currency in this world apart from the petrodollar, which basically really is not backed by anything. The petrodollar is just because of its use case. So because a lot of people are using the dollar, that and it becomes a currency exchange, for currency exchange, that becomes where its value comes from. But for the fact that it is backed by a commodity, it's not backed by anything. We need to have a currency on the continent that is backed by a commodity. We have the commodity. We have pushed to abundance of this commodity. We have a whole entire continent that is loaded with all kinds of commodities that the world needs now. But one commodity that the world is looking for, that we absolutely do have, whose history has not changed, it's gold. So if we're able to use that, create a currency that is backed by gold, then I think that the continent will absolutely emerge from where she is to where she's supposed to be. And this will be a beautiful story for the African, for small to medium-sized enterprises that are on the continent of Africa, will have enough money to be able to put young people, who are trying to be able to set up their own businesses, to set up businesses so that they can be able to now employ, other young Africans and bring them into the economic sector. The private sector will be steaming, will be beaming with a lot of innovations. We will now be able to allow foreign corporations to come and invest on the continent of Africa because they know that our money is stable, our economies are stable, and we will now be able to start talking about manufacturing and all the other things that we need to do so far as the continent is concerned. If we have all these raw materials, if we have 60% of the world arable land, there is no reason why manufacturing should not be taking place on the continent of Africa, not the type that is taking place in China, but I'm talking about responsible manufacturing where all stakeholders are basically taking into account stakeholders. I'm talking about the environment. I'm talking about those who live besides, where all of these manufacturing facilities will be, so that we can truly be able to start protecting the environment as we see it. The reality is Africa should be able to have their own currency, and if that currency will be backed by gold, that will be a legitimate currency, and that is the dream I have for the African.
Thank you so much, Dr. FONGOD. I'll stay with you. Now, you said it's actually going to be very beneficial for Africa to have a single currency, but away from that, when you look at these three countries, just in a quick one, what do you think, or what suggestions can you make as far as the three countries that constitute the alliance of Sahelian states are concerned with the latest developments which they are bringing forth?
I think that if they will be able to set up that singular currency that they're looking for, that will be good. And the reason for that is I have no issues if they basically set up that currency. There are many countries on the continent of Africa, those francophone countries, I don't know, I think there are about 12 of them that uses the CFA. If 3 of these countries basically get out and set up their own currency and we see how that goes, let them become the guinea pig that we need to see exactly what it will mean for us to be able to have a currency that is other than the CFA. The economic principles, the financial principles, the monetary principles, physical principles that they're going to have, within these particular countries will be vital to see exactly how the currency behaves in relationship to its value, whether, it's going to suffer massive inflation or it's going to hold sway based upon its economic activities that is taking place within the region. If that was going to hold sway, then I think that other countries that are still holding to a CFA might have the safe haven they need to be able to dump that stuff, come out with their own thing, and then be able to maintain similar fiscal and monetary policies in this particular, which will be taking place in the place like Sahel, in the place like those 3 states. If they succeed, and they can be able to copy that, I think it's a win-win situation. Even if they fail, we will be able to know why they fail, and as a result of that, come out with something that's a little bit more robust. They are very smart, very intelligent people on the continent, very smart, very intelligent people in Niger, very smart, intelligent people in places like Mali and Burkina Faso, in the economic field, in the finance field, that will be able to restructure, do whatever they need to do without the influence of somebody coming from the outside telling them how to be able to do this. If that was going to be the case, then other countries on the continent that is still enshrined in the CFA might be able to say, this is our safe way out, this is a safe way for us to be able to exit and then get something that is uniquely ours, and voila, the continent will begin to breathe a sign of relief, because at least one big gigantic dictator called France would now officially be out of the continent.
Thank you so much, Dr. FONGOD, Pan-Africanist economist and CEO of Creston FinTech. Now to you, SHITTU FOWORA. You listened to what your co-panelists had to say as far as that is concerned, but then when you look at the concept of the African continent, what do you think would, aside from, say, a single passport, aside from a single currency, what do you think is going to boost integration amongst African states?
Yeah, there's a lot that we can use to boost integration amongst us. I want to see that more African countries domesticate language for learning, because most times there's a language barrier for people, let's say, a Cameroonian who has his first language and he has to learn French in order to access education. Let us domesticate knowledge into our various languages such that people understand principles, ideas, concepts, perspectives from their native local languages. That's one. Two, we should consider traveling from exploring the world. And in order to explore the world, people explore the world through, flying to these various countries, through books. We should do more in the areas of research, right? Creative content that will be useful to people regardless of their location. That way, we'll begin to raise to the level of authority or to the level of currency books written by fellow Africans, for which, when you have read, wonderful books, you want to visit the location, you want to see the people that were described, in this place. So we must deploy our creative talent, even in our movies. We should be able to do things that are not basically like we are imitating or aping the West. These things have a way to rouse the mind, to motivate people to say, I want to be in that country. I want to be part of that country. I want to take a spouse from that country. I want to be part and parcel of the history, of these people. That's the reason why a lot of people are going to the United States today, wanting to be part of, history making. So in order to really integrate and be better, we must collaborate. We must share knowledge. We must share ideas. We must also ensure that the instruments for integration are activated, because most of these instruments exist on paper, but we do not move with the political will to implement what we need to implement. There should be ban on some certain produces that are coming to the continent. People, countries importing certain produces that are available on the continent should not be the thing. Again, we must improve our export, value. Few countries in Southern Africa, not too many countries, on the continent are utilizing, considering the amount of livestock that we produce across the, the continent. So we must look at the areas where we are found wanting, and then consider how we can have a holistic approach towards, having a more integrated and more defined engagement with the rest of the world. We will strengthen ourselves here and then engage the world and become a better continent.
Absolutely, and I like the way you ended that Africa needs to strengthen itself before engaging with the rest of the world. Now, in that regard, we have seen on several fronts the African continent, or several pundits have said Africa is not all being underrepresented at the global level. But then, with what you've said, how can Africa actually work on itself in a bid to strengthen itself from within so it can be able to fully represent itself at the outer world, or better still, at the level of the global stage?
One of the things that gets my goat is seeing Africans begging to be represented at the global stage. If I had the heads and the minds and the thoughts of African heads of state, I would say pull out of all international groups where you're underrepresented. You cannot have on a seat, for example, 10 Europeans and 1 African. It is scandalizing. It is offensive. It is misrepresentation, and it does not, place us in any area where we can have, any bargaining power. If you are representing other nation states in scientific research, if you have to represent by continent and you have, say, 10 per continent, Africa has no reason to be on any scientific research desk that does not represent us with the same number, 10. This is the reason. The more we continue to play second fiddle, we will not be taken seriously. Absolutely. If African heads of state or heads of governments decide that we have cut off, or we have decided to not be members of organizations where we are underrepresented, the world will begin to think twice. How do we engage Africa without Africa feeling left behind? It must be that you come to the same, to the negotiation table with the same footing. If you have international research on nuclear energy, Africa has, may not have nuclear capabilities, but it has a resource to start nuclear capabilities. Therefore, if you have representation, for Europeans, for Asians, for Americans, you have to represent Africa properly. If you have cultural exchange programs that Africans are on the desk, you must ensure that we have equal representation in Africa and other non-African countries. Only in that way will the world begin to reckon with us to understand that we are on equal footing. And again, one of the reasons why we are missed or underrepresented is because we go borrowing all the time. Africa must look inwards, mine its wealth and ensure that it invests heavily on human capacity development. That is the only way where we can drive conversation, where we can mine our wealth, the wealth in the minds and hearts of people, as against simply relying on what we have on the ground. So we can do better as African states by looking inward and really having a sense of pride. We should be proud enough to say we cannot take half measures. We cannot be second. We cannot play second fiddle, in the scheme of things, and we must continue to push for a greater representation of Africa in global stage in such a way that we do not sound like broken records, but as equal partners in the wheel of global progress.
Exactly, equal partners, a statement that resonates with one that was made by a Chinese diplomat, which stated that Africa should be treated equally when it comes to the way it deals, or the way the rest of the world deals with the continent. Now, since we're gradually coming to the end of today's edition, SHITTU, when you look at Africa, speaking of partnerships, what do you think what criteria should be taken into consideration when Africa is welcoming partners into the continent? One, that was going to boost cooperation, like we've seen amongst the states of the alliance of Sahelian states.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of partnerships, interregional partnership, Africa-wide partnership with global players. We have FOCAC, we have NEPAD, we have a lot of partnerships happening across the world. Exactly. One of the things that I see in this partnership is that most times African states do not read the fine print, the fine lines between the details in this partnership. That is why sometimes you have partnership with other countries where at some point there is a breakdown of understanding. Somehow a party does not keep to the words or to the dictates of the agreement, and then you begin to have unnecessary legal challenges to an existing project. So there are projects in Africa that, because something was missing at the onset, those projects have been stalled. Some of them are railway projects, some of them are construction projects, some of them are projects that should ordinarily push the progress of the country forward, but it has stalled because of unnecessary legalese, between both sides. So at the moment, Nigeria is battling, a couple of such, agreements where, the foreign partners have started litigation against the country. So in terms of cooperation, the fine print, the detail of what needs to be done by each party must be known, must be understood, so that we can have a mutual, growth mindset and, achieve whatever we must achieve for the African cause.
Exactly. And of course, I would like to reiterate that in line with what was made by Ghanaian former President John Mahama, he stated that there should be some sort of follow-up, which is in line with what you said, SHITTU. There should be some follow-up of developmental projects, not just for the benefit of that nation, but it's going to boost on, it's going to be some sort of follow-up for what has been in plan for the country, and it goes a long way for the continent. Meanwhile, while we're wrapping up today's conversation, when you look at these three Sahelian states, and when you look at the African continent, forging forward, what would you advise the televiewers or listeners or the audience watching us or listening to us at this point in time on what should be done in a bid to foster or deepen this unity which we are calling for amongst Africans for the greater good of the country? Because when you look at the three countries, they identified what their problem was, they identified their strengths and their weaknesses, and they have been able over time, in the span of 1 year, to be able to, use their weaknesses for their own good. And we are seeing that in their economic, is excelling as far as the economic growth is concerned, and you're seeing them growing steadfast as far as their development is concerned. So likewise, the African continent, what are your take-home message, or what's your take-home message as far as today's topic of discussion is concerned? African
electorates and the masses must urge their governments and their representatives to open, the civic space where people's opinions matter, where the voices of the masses can be harnessed for the progress and growth of the country, where journalists can cover events and cover situations and reports, research and investigations without being attacked by the state. Because we are able to look into issues, dig these issues that are important for the future of our nation, and ensure that those who must hear these things, hear them. Implementation is key. Before we grow as a people, we must ensure that we hear ourselves better. Citizens and the leaders, the led, and those who are in position of government. So for us to have a more cohesive, a more united Africa, we must open the civic spaces, the democratic spaces, allow multiple views and perspectives, welcome dissenting voices in a way that it will be for the betterment of the people and the betterment of the regions, and then at the betterment of the entire continent.
Now, they were speaking at the level of, individual Africans, for them to be able to contribute to the growth of the continent. But at the level of the stakeholders, those that are the front line of the decision-making on the African continent, some of those, especially leaders, that get to take some of these tough decisions that, impact the growth of Africa, what message do you have for them?
For decision makers, they must also understand that whatever decisions they take will affect generations unborn. Therefore, when decisions are taken out of by fiat, they should know that it has far-reaching consequences. So consultations should be done. A lot of consultation should be done before certain decisions are taken, so that it doesn't affect the people negatively or impact the polity in a way that things will go down south. So we urge African heads of governments, heads of states, to continue to allow multiple perspectives, to allow people to share opinions, and to ensure that whatever it is they intend to do, there's consultation, there is collaboration with the parliament, for example, there is the legal angle where they are able to ask for legal implication of certain decisions, so that we have a country or countries living in harmony, peace, and progress.
Absolutely. It's all about the interests of the African continent. Thank you immensely, SHITTU FOWORA, digital news editor, who joined us all the way from Nigeria.
Thank you for having me.
It's always a pleasure to host you on this edition of Talking Point. Meanwhile, ladies and gentlemen, we say thank you for staying through with us all through today's edition of Talking Point over your Pan-African channel, 4U Media Africa. You're watching us on 4U television. You listen to us over the airways of FM 96.3. And not to forget that we were streaming on our social media platforms. Today, we picked interest in the alliance of Sahel states, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, where these three countries have announced that very soon they shall be launching a new passport. Meanwhile, we believe you learned a lot from today's exchange, today's conversation. I'll leave you in company of our numerous programs. Bye-bye.